Master Gadra was grim-faced, deep in thought, upon receiving information from Yuki. Why now, when the Empire finally has the opportunity to destroy the god Luminous? With the revival of Storm Dragon Veldora, drastic revisions were made to the plan. That couldn't be helped, since, in the last expedition, the Storm Dragon had completely ruined the project. And now, opinions in the Empire were greatly divided. The first faction proposed waiting for the Storm Dragon to disappear to ensure the success of their plan. The second faction sought to subjugate the Storm Dragon with the power of their newly developed weapons. Lastly, the third faction urged to avoid the Great Jura Forest in its entirety, so as not to stir trouble with the Storm Dragon. The schism between these three factions threw a wrench in the Empire's ability to move forward. As a consequence, they had allowed the revival of the Storm Dragon. The faction seeking the Storm Dragon's subjugation was infuriated at this turn of events, but the other two factions held the majority, and thus, their opinion was ignored. After all, if the new weapons didn't work, they would have been setting themselves up for another abysmal failure. As for Gadra, he didn't care about the Storm Dragon. His goal in life was to destroy Luminism in the West, and take revenge on the 7 luminary clerics who had killed his close friend. A newspaper he got from the West described the 7 luminary clerics' evil deeds under the headline, "The Downfall of Champions." At the same time, he had heard news that the 7 luminaries had perished. In spite of this, Gadra didn't want to believe this to be true. He was firmly convinced that at least Gran would have survived and was lying low in the shadows. In the past few months, a lot of disinformation had come from the West, and it made it incredibly difficult to corroborate information. Because of this, he did not know whether or not it was true, but there was a rumor that the Rosso family had fallen, too. Well, it's still unconfirmed. The Sun Priest, Gran, is probably that wreck of a hero. Even though he is old, he's not someone you should ever underestimate. Besides, the rule of the Western States Council seemed to be rock solid on the surface, but behind the scenes, various developments had been confirmed. There was no indication among these rumors that the Western Holy Church had been weakened, which seemed to prove to Gadra that the Sun Priest Gran had managed to survive. We should just ignore that Storm Dragon and attack the West. But he knew exactly how hard that was. The Storm Dragon and a Demon Lord are joining forces, huh? It is the height of folly to send an army against such a monstrous creature that lives beyond the laws of magic. I helped to develop the new weapons, so I'm sure they can be used to halt it in its tracks. But to destroy it is another matter. Let alone control it. Gadra had survived the previous great expedition, so he had experienced firsthand how big of a threat Veldora was. Due to this experience, he also thought that the belligerents were reckless. Those fools don't know how hard it is to perform mental control on spiritual life forms in the first place. Achieving mental control over spiritual life forms wasn't entirely impossible. The varying degrees of success from the experiments conducted on demons had proven this. Gadra knew this very well given that he was the one who had come up with this theory. Based on the results from these various investigations, he had arrived at the conclusion that the Storm Dragon Veldora should not be messed with. He has submitted this report to the Emperor, but, unfortunately, it was rejected. There are people who want to do this, so I won't stop them. Gadra's advice fell on deaf ears. There was nothing more he could do. This time, a new problem had appeared: Demon Lord Rimuru. He was the Demon Lord who had unified the Great Jura Forest, established it as a country, and ruled over it. And he had done all this at a terrifying pace. If that Demon Lord had partnered up with the Storm Dragon, attacking the Great Jura Forest would be a fool's gambit. It would be a different story if the Empire mobilized its whole army. Still, it would be necessary to lure the enemy out into favorable terrain in order to deploy the entire army effectively. And normally, that was impossible. Then, how about fighting in the opponent's own ring? Dungeon, eh? Gadra mumbled to himself. They may also be developing weapons from the otherworld. I have no choice but to look into it. It would be advantageous if we could defeat Veldora and Rimuru without sustaining more than 30% in casualties. Otherwise, our following chances for a decisive victory over the Western nations would look bleak. He was giving himself his very own pep talk. Gadra failed to notice that he'd made a grave error. He believed that Luminism, the religion that dominated the Western nations, was the one they should be more cautious of, not Tempest. Whether Gadra would realize this mistake or not was the key that would decide his fate. At the behest of Yuki, 3 people were selected. They were chosen because they were members of the Mixed Corps and, perhaps most importantly, acquainted with Master Gadra. In preparation for the upcoming introduction, Yuki had invited Master Gadra to his room so he could meet the men that were to become his entourage. They were Shinji, a university student from Japan who had spent most of his days in the lab doing research. Even in this world, he loved wearing a white coat, which had now become his trademark look. Mark Lauren. He was a brown-haired, muscular man in his mid-20s, making him the oldest of the 3. As a guy in peak physical condition, he was the type to wear a tank top and jeans all year round, even in the winter. Shin Liuxing. This was a young man of few words. Well, you could never quite tell what he was thinking. He would carry out his orders to a T. He wore a loose Chinese-style outfit with his braided black hair running down his back. It seemed like he always had various weapons tucked away underneath his loose clothes. Both Mark and Shin followed Shinji's words obediently. And before he knew it, Shinji had established himself as their leader. The three of them lined up straight in front of Yuki and Gadra. "Long time no see, teacher." The black-haired young man, Shinji, greeted Gadra on behalf of the group. "Indeed, Shinji, long time no see. And you too, Mark and Shin, have you been well?" "Yes, I'm fine. I'm glad that you seem to be doing well, too." "Master, I'm not well." Gadra grinned widely upon hearing Mark and Shin's replies. "You haven't changed one bit. I am relieved to see that the core is thriving." These three were otherworlders protected by Yuki. He gathered otherworlders from all over the world under his protection and sent them to the Empire, whether they had any affinity for combat or not. They were received by the Secret Society Cerberus and brought to Master Gadra, the archmage of the Empire. Although his goal was to elicit otherworld knowledge from them, Gadra trained those who had the will, as well as talent, for combat. And those he instructed belonged to an exceptional group, a place for individuals with unique and special talents, the Mixed Corps. The Empire wasn't quite so naive as to bestow high military ranks upon people, simply because they were otherworlders. It was due to the fact that these people were able to masterfully wield their power, making them excellent warriors in their own right. That power was the unique skill that manifested in each of them. The three, having achieved full command of their unique skills, had earned themselves unshakable positions in the army. Yeah, Shinji and the gang are top-notch even among my Mixed Corps. I believe that they are the perfect candidates for this investigative mission. If Yuki Dono says so, then I have no qualms about it. You guys can take a seat, too. The trio sat down in their chairs as suggested by the stern wizard, feeling a slight sense of dread. Gadra chuckled as he watched them. Even though they had become competent soldiers, he still got a kick out of seeing them so nervous around him. "So, Yuki Dono, you will lend these three to me for the investigation." Gadra broke the ice, not dwelling on the little fun he had. "Yeah. I wanted to do the investigation myself, but unfortunately, I really can't go to that country. Sending only these three does worry me, so as their supervisor, I wonder if I could ask for your help too, Master." The report I read was quite intriguing. If what's written in it is true, then it's imperative that we investigate it before the great expedition. Gadra looked at Yuki inquisitively, waiting for his response. Yuki nodded as if he'd seen it coming. "They are all true. I will explain it to you three as well. This mission is a little bit special. I want you to investigate a certain labyrinth." Whoa, please wait a second. We've been summoned here to do some kind of obstacle course. Are we that unreliable to you? Even if it's a request from Master Gadra, that kind of thing should have to wait until after the great military invasion. Mark, the hot-head among the three, flared up at Yuki. This was business as usual with Mark. Yuki would let him blurt out as many questions as he wanted if he wasn't convinced. "Calm down, Mark," Shinji chided him. "This is a serious matter, okay? But just be patient, Mark. Yuki-san has something in mind, right? First let's listen to what he has to say." Having placated Mark, Shinji turned to Yuki. "Well then, please explain." "Of course. If you hear me out, I'm most certain you won't have any complaints." And so, Yuki began his thorough explanation of their mission. Gadra had heard it all beforehand, so he just sat there listening to Yuki, checking if there were any inconsistencies in his statements. The trio, meanwhile, was astonished. Yuki's protégés, warriors possessing unique skills, had infiltrated every corps as sleeper agents. Once awoken, they were to simultaneously create an uprising and seize control over their corps. The trio wasn't given any specific details, but they had reason to believe that day was near. These three were part of it, too. They believed it was only a matter of time before they got their orders, now that Yuki had taken control of the Mixed Corps. World domination. When they heard Yuki's dream, it seemed so childish that none of them thought for a second that they could pull it off. But as time went on, they began honing their abilities, and started becoming aware of the state of the world. At large cracks started forming in their doubts, and soon enough, a belief that this was possible started to take root in their minds. Shinji and the others had come to admire Yuki and eagerly awaited that moment. But when they were called out of the blue, they instead received an order to conquer the dungeon. The three of them were understandably puzzled. Still, as they listened to the explanation, they began to come around to the idea. According to Yuki, of all the preparations and investigations done for the war, only the labyrinth remained a mystery. And they thought it was highly likely to house a number of secrets within its walls. After hearing that a whole city was hidden inside it, they knew they had something significant on their hands. "I understand. The Imperial army can't ignore the dungeon before making its move. A whole city. I won't believe it until I see it with my own eyes. So that's why we are going, right?" The three of them muttered as it finally clicked. "That's all I have to say. You guys get it now, right?" If the Empire invades the Great Jura Forest in this expedition, then we will stage the coup d'etat once the front lines become entrenched. To have the advantage when that time comes, we will need as much of the Imperial army as possible lured away. Demon Lord Rimuru's forces and the Storm Dragon Veldora alone are not a reason enough to set the whole force of the Imperial army into motion. We need a stronger, more compelling reason to make them move. Yuki indicated that such a reason may or may not be found in the labyrinth, and if there really wasn't one, then they should just make one up. And while that reason kept the Imperial army occupied, Yuki would seize control of the Empire's capital.